So it's still the dead of winter here in New York, but I'm looking at a lot of orchids that need repotting right now. And I was thinking, there's a lot of orchids that I either have to repot or uppot. So I'll say that I've noticed through the years as I start growing more and more, I'm getting a little bit more lazy with my repots. So many orchids, not enough time. They get big. And I have uppotted quite a few successfully, like this one. This is my Brassivola Little Star. And it gave me the best show that I've ever had. So many blooms, gorgeous, very pretty, so fragrant, it's still going. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about uppotting versus repotting, when to do it, when not to do it, some considerations to keep in mind, and just my experience with all of this. Anyhow, you guys know the drill. If you like this kind of video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more orchid content. So as always, let's jump right in. Okay, so uppotting an orchid. Basically, that is when you take an orchid that you have, you take it in another pot and surround it with fresh media. Typically, when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're using high quality materials, and in general, you don't want to put anything super old into that pot. I repotted this one. I have a lot of hybrids that are very vigorous. This is my rustic spots. It's a Richard Mueller hybrid. Look at how it's growing. It's even attached to some rocks I have in the pot. It's so vigorous. It was in a bark mix. What I did was I took it out of that pot and then I just plopped it in this one. It was like in a seedling plug. Super easy. I just added a little moss around it, added more bark around it. And it's growing quite nicely. I did that last year, and look, it's already taking over this pot. And I'll probably have to get it in a bigger pot. I don't know if I'm going to uppot it again. We'll see. Maybe. I don't know. But something to keep in mind is, as I said, you want fresh media. So you want something that's high quality. You don't want cheap material that's breaking down. If it's breaking down, it's going to compact. Orchid roots need air. You don't want anything that's degrading. So if you're going to do it, you want to do it for something that didn't break down, that you think is going to last at least a year or at least until you can repot it again. In the case of my little stars, I uppotted it 2 years ago and it was in very high quality Orchiata bark. Orchiata bark can last a very long time, a couple of years actually. And what I did was I put it in I think this is in New Zealand pine bark. But I surrounded it. The pot is in there. I made a quick little video that you guys could check out. But I took the pot because it had a lot of holes in it and a lot of the roots grew out of the holes. And I put it in this larger clay pot and then surrounded it with bark. Bark is going to last longer than moss. I probably wouldn't recommend it for something like sphagnum moss that kind of breaks down and degrades over time. But as your orchid gets bigger, you're going to run out of time. Someone told me I should uppot that one so I could get an even bigger show, but this is already too big for my apartment. This is a 6-inch orchid pot. That's going to be tough. So what's the benefit of uppotting? Well, in my case, for my little stars, the blooms are just incredible. You don't disturb the roots as much. So that means that the orchid is not going to be as shocked. So if you have an orchid that you want to bring to a show, that you're going to get judged, you want more blooms, uppotting will help in that you're not going to disturb the root system as much. Some people just don't repot when they have a show or something like that. But if you uppot, you're disturbing the roots a lot less. Now, what are the downsides? Well, you want to make sure you're using similar materials, because if you use something more moisture retentive in the middle and more bark outside, it's going to dry fast on the outside. It could rot on the inside. So you want to be careful. And naturally over time, whatever you have in that pot will degrade. So it may stay a little bit more moist. So just keep that in mind. I have done it with sphagnum moss, but I don't do it often because moss will break down, but I use high quality triple grade New Zealand sphagnum moss because I find that it lasts 2 years usually. I find that it lasts like 2 years, maybe 3 years. But if it starts smelling or anything like that, it gets too acidic. But I try not to do it with moss just because I do know that it breaks down a lot faster. But I will do it for like a year and then I'll repot again. There are times where it doesn't make sense though. Like this made sense because it was in a plug that looked fresh. This is a vigorous hybrid. So I just took it out of that pot, put it in another one, surrounded it with bark, and I was good to go. But then there was another repot. This one I did with you guys. This is my BL Morning Glory, such a beautiful, vigorous orchid. I was going to up pot this, but I ended up removing the bark because I felt like I wanted more room in the pot. If I put it just right in there, it was going to grow on the edges too fast, and it's kind of already growing at the edges, and I'm going to need to repot it real soon. But sometimes if you need more room in the pot, if it's an easy repot, just get rid of the old media and put it in the new media. It's not a big deal because I wanted to angle this. I just wanted to have it all the way at the edge of the pot so that I had more room on this side. But look, already it's almost there. This is so, oh gosh. I have a lot of vigorous hybrids. I don't even know. Repotting is going to be very challenging for me this year, but it's okay. So what's a good candidate? Something that hasn't been in a pot for too long. This has only been in this pot for a year. This is a good candidate. This is high quality pine bark. This is a good candidate because I could just take it out of this pot, put it in maybe like a 5-inch pot. You see it's not as deep. And then I could just have these roots go right in there. Of course, I can remove the media, but then it'll disturb these roots. So it's not a big deal. In the beginning, when I first started growing orchids, I would take everything out. I was so meticulous with the orchids, but then I think anyone very experienced starts getting rougher with their orchids over time. And I treat my orchids very well when I'm repotting. I'm not yanking things out, but okay, sometimes I am, but over time, when your collection grows, you just don't have the time to give that white glove treatment to every single plant that you have, you know? So I end up potting just to save some time for myself. Again, it's crucial to use high quality materials because then that allows you the flexibility to be able to up pot. So something that's outgrowing their pot like this, you could just plop it in another pot the next year if it's super vigorous. It's not a big deal. But if you use like very cheap bark, I wouldn't advise it. Maybe you could get away with it for a year. But I just try to repot as little as possible now, just because I have way too many orchids. But yeah, the benefits are you're gonna get a lot more flowers because you're disturbing that orchid a lot less, but you just have to be aware of some of that old potting material is going to break down. It's going to be older than the new potting material. I try to keep the potting material the same. Sometimes it won't be, but I have some orchids in coconut husk when I was using coconut husk for a while, and then I wrapped it in bark. I've had no issues, but you want to be mindful of maybe you don't want to put something that's in sphagnum moss with just bark around because then the outside is going to be dry, the inside is going to be too moist. So you want to use comparable things. My preferred setup is bark and a little bit of moss, and for the reason for that is that I grow in a spare bedroom over there, and I don't like to come here to water everything, so I water literally everything within the shelves. And because I have a little bit of moss inside, this is probably 85% bark, 15% moss. If I pour it, it kind of like disperses everywhere. I got this tip from Miss Orchid Girl. Really good tip if you grow indoors, by the way. If you're watering, it kind of spreads all over. Clay pots also kind of spread and absorb, and rather they breathe. But I feel like it spreads pretty much. If you have water on the bottom, it kind of absorbs up and then kind of evaporates out. But anyway, that's the reason why I use a little bit of moss. If you have a little bit of moss in the pots, they will last for a few years. It's when you have all moss that it gets acidic real fast and where it impacts the plant. But a little bit, if it's like a little bit like, if it smells bad, you want to get rid of it. But if you have it for 2 years, if you've had it for a year, then you want to up pot next year, or even 2 years and you want to give it another year. It's not a big deal if you don't have too much moss. If you have a lot of moss, if it smells bad, definitely don't do it. But yeah. I'm a fan of this. It saves time repotting. It makes your orchid have more blooms longer. With that said, it can have some uneven drying depending on the materials. You want to match the materials as much as possible. And honestly, there's not really a downside in my opinion. You just want to make sure to use the best quality materials that are accessible to you. For me, for a long time during the pandemic, it was coconut husk, because sphagnum moss was, I couldn't find any sphagnum moss, and when I could find it, it was so expensive that I wasn't gonna spend that much money on it. So I went with coconut husk for a really long time, and coconut husk can last for a few years, so no regrets there. But you want to use the best of what you can, and that will last a longer time. And if you have a larger collection, it's actually more economical over time. So I know this was a quick video, kind of all over the place, but I'm kind of all over the place trying to figure out when I'm gonna start repotting. I could probably repot this now, but I'm waiting, so we'll see about that. I'm waiting till the spring really to get it going, but I'm gonna be ordering more supplies. I like the bark from Sunset Valley Orchids. I buy it in bulk. Given that I have so many orchids, I buy my sphagnum moss in bulk as well. If you buy the right materials, even if they're a little bit more expensive, they last longer, so it ends up working out. Don't be, the cheap stuff isn't always the better stuff, so sometimes it's worth paying for more. Just something that I've noticed, but yeah. Let me know down below how you guys pot your orchids up, if you've gotten started, if you like up potting versus fully repotting. But I wanted to share what I've been doing with my collection of 200 orchids, because it's so many and I've had really good success with this one and even others. I just find that the blooms are just so beautiful when you disturb the roots less. And sometimes a less is more approach is better for orchids. You don't have to be as careful as I was in the very beginning, where you free every single orchid, you refresh everything every time. Sometimes it's counterintuitive, because when you're repotting, you're still kind of messing with that root system way too much, and then it affects how it grows. It sets the orchid back a little bit, sometimes a lot, if it's the wrong season or if they're not pushing good roots. But up potting, you're kind of shocking the orchid a little bit less. Leave me a comment down below if you like this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye everyone.